Okay, once again, Psalm 23 and verse 3, He restoreth my soul. Been looking at what that involves. We've seen thus far that it's a making anew, a true change. It's Him drawing us near to Himself. It's a reviving of soul. We saw last week it's a bringing to repentance. And we want to see it's also a spiritual refreshment. In Isaiah chapter 44, in verse 3, Isaiah 44, verse 3, the Lord is speaking. He says, I will pour water upon him that is thirsty, and floods upon the dry ground. I will pour my Spirit upon thy seed, and my blessing upon thine offspring. Here you see God providing water for the thirsty in abundance, floods for the dry ground, and then His Spirit. What this verse pictures is satisfaction, refreshment, revival, growth, comfort, all from the hand of God. And that's what it is when the Lord restoreth our soul. In Deuteronomy chapter 32, along the same lines, Deuteronomy 32, verse 2, he says, my doctrine, my teaching, shall drop as the rain. My speech shall distill as the dew, as the small rain upon the tender herb, and as the showers upon the grass. Again, speaking of refreshment. In Psalm 72, Psalm 72, in verse 6, He shall come down like rain upon the mown grass, as showers that water the earth. All of these, of course, are just pictures of spiritual refreshment, and that's what the Lord does when He restores our soul. Next, we want to go to Isaiah chapter 40. Restoration of soul is an impartation of divine strength. It is an impartation of God's power. In Isaiah 40, very familiar verses 29 through 31. He giveth power to the faint, and to them that have no might He increaseth strength. Even the youths shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint. Now, Isaiah's time, of course, was a time of great political struggle. A very popular king, Uzziah, had died during Isaiah's time. But it was also an appalling spiritual decline. From Isaiah chapters 1 through 5, we get a pretty good picture of what it was like during Isaiah's ministry. And in those chapters, you see it was a time when the people did not acknowledge God overall. And the masses were weighted down with sin. Evil was spreading throughout the land. The Lord was being continually renounced. It was a time of empty worship. It was a time of formalism. The land was filled with soothsayers teaching their own error. The land was filled with idols. And it was getting worse and worse because of the progressive nature of sin, and also because God's hedges of protection were being removed. And therefore things just kept getting worse. And everywhere was selfishness. You see this mostly in Isaiah chapter 5. Covetousness, materialism. The masses were being influenced. Their lives were governed and driven and shaped by the temporary things of life. There was a frenzy for just the pleasures of life. Sin was open. Sin was very blatant. The land was consumed with immorality. The masses were hard-hearted. They were obstinate. They were unteachable. All of this would be a very strong pull and a drain upon the remnant of God's people. So it was a day of spiritual exhaustion for the remnant that remained. And that's who the Lord is speaking to here in Isaiah chapter 40. Now notice in verse 29, there is the word faint. So some were faint. Some had probably already fainted. That is, there was a loss of spiritual consciousness, a losing of heart, a loss of spiritual resolve. Many had already fainted. And no doubt some were at the point of such. You can say, I feel faint. Doesn't mean you fainted, but you're about to. So, the faint. There were those who had not yet fainted, but they were on the verge of a loss of spiritual consciousness, a losing of heart, a losing of spiritual resolve. In other words, they were at the point of quitting. They were at the point of giving up. So there were those who were faint. Notice in verse 30, even the youths shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. The youth, those who have exuberance, those who have energy, even they shall faint. And then we read, even the young men, and the young men shall utterly fall. Not only fall, but utterly fall. So we see that even the strongest, even the most exuberant would experience this being faint. And so it is today. It happens to everyone from time to time. They become faint spiritually. And that's why it's necessary, the Lord restoreth my soul. Notice also, verse 30, the youths shall faint and be weary. Weary. It speaks of exhaustion, depletion, draining. In other words, tired, exhausted, spent. And again, this in the spiritual realm. This isn't the physical realm. This is the spiritual realm. They're tired. They're exhausted. They're spent. And this was the youths, those that you would not expect to find in this condition. So again, even the strongest will experience such. Also in verse 30, there's the word fall. So we have the word faint, we have the word weary, we have the word fall. And again, it's utterly fall. What that means is a collapse of their spiritual life. Now going back to verse 29, we see there was the condition of no might. No might. That is, no power, no ability to go on. Even if they had the desire, the power to do so, the ability to do so, was not there. So all of this speaks of the great need of spiritual restoration. It all speaks of the great need of a spiritual restart. And every child of God will have a time, will have several times, when they need a spiritual restart. When it has gone too far is when you don't even realize that you need a spiritual restart. A spiritual restart is a spiritual reviving. It's a spiritual arousal, a spiritual invigoration, a restoration. It's a replenishment, a spiritual restart. We're in desperate need of such today. A spiritual restart that will awaken God's people. Because God's people are sound asleep for the most part. We need a spiritual restart that will awaken. A spiritual restart that will change us. Again, in this restoration there is a change. Most do not want to change. Even if they realize the need for change, they don't want to change because they become comfortable with the way it is. But a spiritual restart will change us and convince us. God's people need to be convinced of a lot of things. They need a spiritual restart. A spiritual restart will cause us to do what we need to do, be what we need to be, and rekindle within us that which will enable us to press on. So, in verse 29, he says, He. That immediately refers back to verse 28, but really it goes further back than that. It goes all the way back to verse 9, where we have God described. In verse 9, we read the last three words of that verse are, Behold your God. That goes a long way in a spiritual restart, in a spiritual restoration. In fact, you will not be spiritually restored without that. Behold your God. Behold your God. That's not just a passing glance. That is meditative thought upon God. And then he says in verse 10, Behold, there it is again, the Lord God will come with strong hand. And that's what we need. When restoration is needed, that's what we need, with strong hand. That goes along with, He giveth power to the faint. It's His own power. He comes with strong hand. And His arm shall rule. That speaks of dominion. Is God being the dominant one in our lives. And then the third time, behold. So, There's something that is to have our attention. And it's God. His reward is with Him, and His work before Him. He shall feed His flock like a shepherd. That's part of restoration. The Lord shall feed His flock. First, He has to get them in a condition where they want to eat, where they want to be fed. He shall feed His flock. He shall gather the lambs, that's the weakest, with His arm, and carry them in His bosom, and shall gently lead those that are with young, those who have very special need. And then in verses 12 through 14, again, this is all describing the He of verse 29. It's describing the one who restoreth our soul. In verses 12 through 14, he speaks of God's incomparable knowledge. God knows every aspect of your life that needs restoration. He knows when it is needed. Incomparable knowledge. Who hath measured the waters in the hollow of His hand, meted out heaven with the span, and comprehended the dust of the earth in a measure, and weigheth and weighted the mountains in scales, and the hills in a balance? Who hath directed the Spirit of the Lord, or being His counselor, hath taught Him? He knows everything. He knows everything. Knows everything about His creation. Knows everything He could have created but didn't. Knows everything. With whom took He counsel? And who instructed Him? And taught Him in the path of judgment, and taught Him knowledge, and showed to Him the way of understanding. The one who giveth power to the faint, and the one who increaseth strength of those who have no might, is a God of incomparable knowledge. He knows how to bring restoration. And then in verses 15 through 17, verse 15 opens up again with that word, behold. Behold. Behold, the nations are as a drop of a bucket. Now, he just finished speaking concerning His creation. And God's creation is so great that when you look at the nations, they're nothing in comparison with everything that God has created. Behold, the nations are as a drop of a bucket, and are counted as the small dust of the balance. Behold, He taketh up the isles as a very little thing, and Lebanon is not sufficient to burn, nor the beasts thereof sufficient for a burnt offering. All nations before Him are as nothing, and they are counted to Him less than nothing and vanity. So God has incomparable knowledge. God's creation is so marvelous that when you consider the nations, they're nothing. You consider the continents and the islands, they're nothing in comparison with everything else that God has created. And it is He that giveth power to the faint. In verse 18 through 20, God is superior to all the idols, to everything that man would set up in place of God. He asks a question in verse 18, to whom then will ye liken God? Or what likeness will ye compare unto Him? He's incomparable. The workmen, that are those who build and fashion the idols, melteth the graven image, and the goldsmith spreadeth it before the gold, and casteth silver chains. He that is so impoverished that he hath no oblation chooseth a tree that will not rot, a tree that he doesn't think will rot. And he seeketh unto him a cunning workman to prepare a graven image that shall not be moved. Man is looking for a God that cannot be moved. So he finds a tree that he doesn't think will rot. The wood will not rot, and he makes an idol out of that. God is superior to all. Verse 22, we see that God is sovereign. It is He that sitteth upon the circle of the earth, and the inhabitants thereof are as grasshoppers, that stretcheth out the heavens as a curtain, and spreadeth them out as a tent to dwell in. It's this God who giveth power to the faint. It's this God who gives strength to those who have no might. It's this God who brings restoration of soul. Verse 23, that bringeth the princes to nothing. It's God in sovereign control. He brings the rulers to nothing. He maketh the judges of the earth as vanity, as if they were nothing. And it's this God who restoreth our soul. Verse 24, they shall not be planted, yea, they shall not be sown. Yea, their stock shall not take root in the earth. And He shall also blow upon them, and they shall wither. And the whirlwind shall take them away as stubble. Speaks of His victory. Speaks of God as victorious. Then in verse 25 we see it again. To whom then will ye liken me? Or shall I be equal? Saith the Holy One. Lift up your eyes on high. And there it is again. Behold. It's the fourth time. Behold, who hath created these things, that bringeth out their hosts by number. He calleth them all by names, by the greatness of His might. For that He is strong in power, not one faileth. Then down to verse 28, hast thou not known? Hast thou not heard that the everlasting God, the Lord, the Creator of the ends of the earth, fainteth not? Man faints, even the strongest of men faint. We've already seen that. Neither is weary. Man is weary, even the strongest, even the most energetic. There is no searching of his understanding. And it is this God that giveth power. So notice verse 29. He, the God that we've just referred to, He. We don't have to derive our power from anywhere else. He giveth power. Well, what is power? Well, power is an active force. It's an active force. It's energy. And He giveth power. He acts as the force, and He gives energy to the faint. To the faint. It can be those who have already fainted. It can be those who are about to faint. It doesn't matter. He giveth power to the faint. That's spiritual restoration. It goes on. For those who have no might, He increaseth strength. What is strength? I believe there's a difference between power and strength here. Strength speaks of ability. And really it's the result of the power, the energy, the active force of God. So the power is the energy behind the strength. And He giveth power. And by giving power, He gives strength. So again, the power is the energy behind the strength. He giveth power. If you have ability to serve God in any capacity, it was He who gave you the power, which provides the strength. It's not of man. and neither is the restoration of soul. He giveth power, energy, and the result is strength. That is, ability or enablement. God, again, Paul said in Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ, who strengtheneth me. I can do all things through Christ. Through Christ is the power. That's the energy. And strengtheneth is the result of that. So He giveth power, and the result is strength. This is spiritual renewal. And that's what Psalm 23 verse 3 is speaking of. He restoreth my soul. That is spiritual renewal. How often God's people try to restore themselves. They come to the realization that they're not where they ought to be spiritually. They're not what they ought to be spiritually. So they're going to make some changes and restore themselves. That'll never work. It's always short-lived. But He giveth power. He giveth power. He gives His power. He is the source. He giveth power to the faint. And when He gives power to the faint, something's going to happen. There's going to be an increase in strength. So the God of verses 9 through 28 is the God who restoreth our soul. So in verse 30, he reminds us that even the youths, those who are exuberant, filled with energy, even the youths shall faint. No one is beyond fainting. You may feel spiritually exuberant. That's good. But it won't last forever. Even the youths shall faint. And even the strong men shall fall. Or the young men, which are the stronger. Even they will fall. Collapse. And again, utterly. And then we see a contrast, verse 31. But, even the strongest amongst men, even the most spiritually exuberant amongst men, shall faint and shall fall. But, so now there's hope. Now there's hope. But, they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. So now we see there is a place where spiritual renewal can be found. When we realize I need restoration, you need to know that only He can give it. And you need to know that there is a place where spiritual renewal can be found. It's not in a church. It's not in a worship service. Now you can get in this place, in those places, but it is a place before the Lord. They that wait upon the Lord. They're waiting upon Him. They're before Him. Shall renew their strength. To wait upon the Lord is to be in His presence. It's to be in His presence. Again, Mark chapter 2. The Lord healed the man that was paralyzed. They laid him before Him. Now there's hope. Because that man is in the presence of the Lord. That's where restoration takes place. They that wait upon the Lord. That means we quiet ourselves and we focus our attention upon God. They wait upon the Lord. A lot of God's people waiting for something to happen, but that won't fix anything. We're to focus our attention upon God, waiting for God. It is to look intently to God. It is to look intently to God for communication from Him. They that wait upon the Lord shall, if they wait long enough. Well, I waited for 5 minutes. You got to wait longer than that. If they wait long enough, they will receive communication from Him. And in that communication is restoration of soul. To wait upon God is seeking the face of God. This is what we need to do when we need spiritual restoration. It is expressing absolute confidence in God. I'm going to wait upon Him because I know that He is the answer. Not waiting upon my circumstances to change. I'm waiting upon God because circumstances changing may at best be a short-term answer. But God is the long-term answer. So you wait, expressing absolute confidence in Him. It is also a position of submission before God. It is submission to the fact that He knows and that God is able. So I'll wait for Him. It's to bring our life under the umbrella of God's authority and direction. And most are not willing to do that. Most want to be their own authority. Most want to go in their own direction. But to wait is to bring ourselves under God's authority, under God's direction. And there's strength there. There's renewal there. To wait upon the Lord requires a desire toward Him. How long will we wait? Well, it depends how strong our desire is. But it requires a desire toward Him. It requires a delight in Him. It requires dependence upon Him and devotion to Him. Wait. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. So there's renewal here. There's restoration in the presence of God. We see this all through the Scriptures. Waiting is a very significant subject throughout the Scriptures. It's very important. It's something that most are not interested in doing, nor do they know how to wait upon the Lord. But the place of waiting, again, is a place of restoration. Why? Because the place of waiting is a place of receiving. A place of receiving from God. Psalm 37 and verse 9, those that wait upon the Lord, they shall inherit. What does that mean? They shall receive. They shall inherit the earth. Inherit everything they need. They shall receive. But where did they get it? They that wait upon the Lord shall inherit. It's a place of exaltation, Psalm 37:34. Wait on the Lord. Keep His way. That is, while you're waiting, keep His way. And He shall exalt thee. He shall exalt thee. Well, I waited and He didn't exalt me. You didn't wait long enough. Because it says, He shall. He shall. This is a place of deliverance. Deliverance is necessary for restoration of soul. It's a place of stability. Stability is necessary for restoration of soul. We see this in Psalm 40, verses 1 through 3. Puts a song in our mouth. It is a place of hope and excitement. Psalm 62, 5, my soul, wait thou only upon God, for my expectation, that is, my hope, is from Him. That's the problem today, one of the many problems. God's people have placed their hope in things that they should not place their hope in. All our hope needs to be in Him. And they that wait upon the Lord, they find hope. Again, it's a place of strength. Isaiah 30, verse 7, their strength is to sit still. Their strength is to sit still, which is the same as wait upon God. Isaiah 30, verse 18, blessed are all they that wait for Him. It is a place where we receive blessing. This is spiritual restoration. You will not regret waiting for the Lord, because it is a place of satisfaction. It is a place of contentment. Isaiah 49, 23, for they shall not be ashamed that wait for me. You will not regret it. It's a place where everything is prepared for the child of God. Isaiah 64, verse 4, He hath prepared for him that waiteth for Him. Oh, what is prepared for them that wait for God. It's a place of God's goodness. Lamentations 3, verse 25. So we see here, these that wait upon the Lord shall renew, that's restoration, their strength. Again, remember, strength is the result of power. So waiting upon God, they receive power. And power results in strength. They shall renew their strength. Notice the result. They will mount up with wings as eagles. The eagle has the ability to soar majestically above the earth. They are born to soar above the earth. And you and I, when we were born again, were born to live above this earth. They have the power to rise above. They have the strength to rise above. And every child of God, as a result of God's mighty work, has the potential to soar above everything. The eagle is designed by God for a special and extraordinary way of life. And every child of God is designed for a special and extraordinary way of life. And yet, many of God's people, most, are controlled and dominated by the circumstances and the situations of life. And they live in prisons of their own making. They live in the prisons of pride and worldliness and jealousy and anger and malice and bitterness and unforgiveness, and on we can go. They live in these prisons. But no child of God has to live in one of these prisons. Because we are created to be like the eagle, to soar above, to live a heavenly life. We don't have to be taken captive. Oh, we may be, but you don't have to be. It's not a necessity. You don't have to be taken captive by disappointment or by discouragement or whatever is going on in your life. And as we soar, the higher we live, the higher the altitude, the smaller the world appears. And the world's honors and the world's pleasures ought to be getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And they will. if we're living where we ought to live. If the world is becoming more of a temptation to you, it's because you're not living right. Because the further you rise above this earth, the less appealing it is. As we soar, the impurities of the world have less effect upon us. As we soar, our perspective changes. We don't see things the same way as you do down here on the earth. And we have everything we need to live such a life. He restoreth, He renews their strength. And it's above this world that you'll find the life that truly counts, the life that truly matters. It is above this world that you find the life that makes a difference and has influence and impact. It is above this world where there's a life of usefulness and a testimony for God. Again, as we've said before, you'll never see an eagle hanging out with the chickens and the pigeons. Not going to happen. And guess what? You're not going to see the chickens and the pigeons. They can't live where the eagle lives. And yet most of God's people live the life of the chicken and the pigeon. Just feeding off the scraps. Just feeding off the scraps. Bound to this world. Walking with their eyes upon the ground, scratching in the dirt. That's the life of most. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. And then notice something else. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Two different things. Both signify going forward. Both signify progression. But they're different. Everyone here knows the difference between running and walking. Running is to press forward with a higher level of energy. Walking is just a moving consistently forward. That ought to be our life. That ought to be our life. And that requires restoration of soul. And He restoreth my soul. We were born again to live for Him. And we can do so. Every born-again child of God can do so because He restoreth my soul. We can soar, we can run, we can walk, and though times we become weary and faint, and at times we may have no might, He restoreth my soul. And that ought to be our life. God, you and I experiencing restoration of soul from the power of God. Not from anything else, but from the power of God. Brother Ben, if you'll come and lead us on verse song. Let's all stand and